The Situation Room is shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the flicker of tactical displays and satellite feeds. Somewhere in the northern reaches of the Persian Gulf, a tiny speck of land known as Kharg Island is currently engulfed in flames. This 5-mile-long coral outcrop, situated roughly 480 kilometers north of the Strait of Hormuz, is burning so intensely that the smoke plumes are clearly visible from space. While the world watched the satellite imagery in shock, the man who ordered the strike took to social media to announce the escalation. He declared that under his direction, the United States Central Command had executed one of the most significant bombing raids in the history of the Middle East, claiming to have totally obliterated every military asset on what he described as Iran's crown jewel. This massive military action was not announced through a formal press conference or a coordinated briefing with international allies. Instead, the news was broadcast to 90 million followers in capitalized, unambiguous prose on Truth Social. This marks a pivotal escalation in a conflict that has already claimed over 1,000 lives in just 14 days. However, the social media post contained a crucial detail that many observers missed. Within the text was a third sentence that served as both a diplomatic olive branch and a metaphorical weapon aimed directly at the heart of the global economy. The statement noted that while American weaponry is the most sophisticated in existence, the decision was made to spare Iran's oil infrastructure for reasons of decency. To understand the strategic gravity of this moment, one must understand exactly what Kharg Island represents. Located about 35 miles off Iran's Bushehr province, the island is roughly the size of New York City's Central Park, yet its economic footprint is massive. It possesses a loading capacity of approximately 7 million barrels per day, and staggering statistics show that 90% of Iran's crude oil exports pass through this single terminal. This is not merely a pipeline or a storage depot, it is the bottleneck of the entire Iranian economy. Because the majority of these exports are destined for China and India, the island's status is critical not just for Tehran, but for the stability of the broader global energy market. When the American leadership claims to have destroyed military targets while sparing the oil terminals, it is not an act of simple mercy. It is a calculated move to hold the global energy market hostage. By leaving the infrastructure intact but under threat, the United States has gained immense leverage, essentially signaling that the gun can be put down only if Iran complies with specific demands. As the sun rises this Saturday morning, the international community is waiting with bated breath to see if Iran will blink or if the situation will deteriorate further. In the half hour following that social media post, reports began to emerge of a shift in the calculation, a signal that some officials are describing as both an act of desperation and a potential opening for dialogue. To see how we arrived at this precipice, we must look back to the final days of February 2026. This war did not begin with the fires on Kharg Island. It began in a villa on the outskirts of Tehran with a high-stakes assassination. On the morning of February 28th, American and Israeli forces launched a massive joint operation dubbed Epic Fury. In the first 12 hours alone, nearly 900 strikes were conducted against Iranian missile sites, air defenses, and leadership hubs. According to intelligence officials, the timing was specifically designed to catch Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, before he could retreat to a secure bunker. Khamenei was killed in that initial wave of strikes, ending a 34-year reign and fundamentally altering the political landscape of the Islamic Republic. This decapitation strike created a dangerous power vacuum. Into this void stepped the most radical elements of the Iranian regime. While the CIA assessed that a hardliner from the Revolutionary Guard would likely take control, it was Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late leader, who emerged. Having survived a separate airstrike on March 4th, he was quickly elevated to the position of supreme leader through an emergency succession process, bypassing traditional constitutional mechanisms to lead a regime fighting for its very existence. The younger Khamenei wasted no time in asserting his authority, using state television to warn that the Strait of Hormuz would remain closed as a primary tool of economic pressure. This message was accompanied by threats of retaliatory strikes against American military bases scattered across the region. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which functions as a powerful state-of-the-art military within the country, viewed the unfolding chaos as an opportunity to flex its muscles. A spokesperson for the IRGC's Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters announced that any vessel linked to the United States, Israel, or their regional allies would be considered a legitimate target for destruction. The economic threats were just as blunt. The IRGC warned that the West would be unable to artificially suppress oil prices and predicted that crude could soon reach $200 per barrel. For the average consumer, the reality of these threats is already being felt. Brent crude, the international benchmark, has recently surged by more than 9% as traders react to the prospect of prolonged maritime turmoil. Prices are currently hovering around $101 per barrel. In the United States, the average price of gasoline has climbed to $3.68 per gallon, marking a 23% increase since the outbreak of hostilities. The potential domino effect of a sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz is terrifying to economists. If the waterway remains blocked, the International Energy Agency estimates a reduction in global oil supply by about 8 million barrels a day. Analysts at Goldman Sachs have modeled a scenario where $200 oil could cause a 15% to 20% contraction in S&P 500 valuations within a single month. This would translate to $9 per gallon gasoline in the U.S., the grounding of commercial aviation due to jet fuel costs, and a collapse in food production chains as fertilizer prices skyrocket. Already, 20% of global supplies have been disrupted, and nearly 27% of the world's maritime trade in petroleum, helium, and LNG passes through this narrow choke point. However, a significant shift in the narrative occurred on March 13th, just hours before the strikes on Kharg Island. A senior Iranian official reportedly indicated to international media that Tehran was considering a selective reopening of the strait. The catch, however, was purely geopolitical. Vessels would only be allowed through if their cargo was traded in Chinese yuan rather than the US dollar. This was not a plea for mercy from a defeated nation, but a bold attempt to restructure the global energy payment system. By involving the yuan, Iran is attempting to force China into the role of the de facto guarantor of the Strait of Hormuz. The response from Washington was the obliteration of the 90 military targets on Kharg Island. While the Joshan Naval Base, an airport control tower, and various air defense installations were leveled, the oil terminal, which processes over 6 million barrels a day, remained untouched. This sent a clear message to energy-dependent nations like China, India, and South Korea. The United States controls the fate of their energy supply. In a subsequent public statement, the American president called for an international coalition, including China and France, to send warships to the area to defend against what he called artificial constraints on trade. This request puts Beijing in an incredibly difficult position. China is Iran's largest oil customer and has already sent envoys to seek a ceasefire. Asking China to send warships to enforce a blockade against its own supplier forces the Chinese leadership to choose between its strategic relationship with Tehran and its desperate need for stable energy imports. While Beijing has remained officially silent, diplomatic backchannels are likely working overtime. Amidst this tension, the role of Steve Witkoff, a key figure in the pre-war negotiations, has come under intense scrutiny by the international diplomatic community. Evidence suggests that the path to war was paved with missed opportunities. Just 48 hours before the bombs began to fall, Witkoff and Jared Kushner were in Geneva for Omani-mediated talks with the Iranian foreign minister. While Omani officials believed substantial progress was being made toward a new nuclear agreement, the American leadership was reportedly dissatisfied with the pace of negotiations. Reports now suggest that the Iranians had actually offered to give up their entire stockpile of enriched uranium, a major concession. However, it is alleged that these offers were mischaracterized to the president as unproductive, possibly due to a lack of technical expertise among the negotiators. The human cost of these diplomatic failures is staggering. Over 2,400 Iranians have been killed, alongside American service members and hundreds of Lebanese civilians. The current energy crisis is being compared to the 1973 oil embargo. Despite the mounting casualties and economic pain, there are subtle signals that a window for de-escalation might still exist. Recent social media posts from the White House have characterized Iran as totally defeated and suggested that they want a deal. This phrasing indicates that the conflict is currently viewed as a negotiation through fire rather than a war of total annihilation. Behind the scenes, a coalition of nations including Oman, Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey is working feverishly to initiate a dialogue between Washington and Tehran. Oman, in particular, has maintained its role as a persistent mediator, insisting that off-ramps are still available if both sides are willing to take them. A visible fracture has also appeared within the Iranian government. While the civilian presidency under Masoud Pezeshkian has issued apologies to neighboring Gulf states and pledged to halt attacks, the IRGC has publicly contradicted these commitments, maintaining that any nation hosting American bases remains a target. This internal division is the key lever that regional diplomats are trying to pull. The hardliners, including the new Supreme Leader and the IRGC command, view any deal as a threat to their survival. For them, surrendering missile capabilities or regional influence means personal and political irrelevance. Consequently, they are the ones pushing for $200 oil and threatening the use of hypersonic missiles. Conversely, the civilian leadership recognizes that the current trajectory is unsustainable. With their navy largely destroyed and their air defenses decimated, the physical capacity to resist is rapidly eroding. As the conflict enters its third week, the precedent of the June 2025 ceasefire offers a potential template for peace. During that previous 12-day war, Tehran used regional intermediaries to offer nuclear flexibility in exchange for a cessation of strikes. However, the context in 2026 is far more volatile. The primary American objective has shifted from mere nuclear containment to include the possibility of regime change. This maximalist approach makes it nearly impossible for the IRGC to agree to any terms, as they view resistance not just as a strategy, but as a theological necessity. China remains the most important actor that few are watching closely. Because Beijing holds both economic leverage over Tehran and a desperate need for the strait to remain open, they are the most viable mediators. A Chinese-led framework, perhaps involving a temporary halt to nuclear enrichment in exchange for an end to American strikes, could provide the necessary face-saving exit for both sides. China, India, and Japan account for the vast majority of Gulf exports. If the strait remains closed, the resulting Chinese economic contraction would almost certainly trigger a global recession. The immediate future likely follows one of two paths. In the first scenario, the IRGC escalates by launching advanced HIMARS missiles at Israeli targets, prompting an even more devastating response from the joint American and Israeli forces. This would likely lead to the activation of regional sleeper cells, attacks on embassies, and a spike in oil prices that would cripple the global economy. In this version of events, the window for a ceasefire slams shut, and the world enters a dark period of prolonged and unpredictable conflict. The second path involves a swift intervention by Beijing. In this scenario, a Chinese envoy reaches the Iranian civilian government with a proposal to allow non-Western ships through the strait in exchange for a pause in American bombing. If the American leadership, wary of rising domestic gas prices and falling stock markets, accepts this pause as a victory, the guns could go quiet. While this would not be a permanent peace, it would provide the quiet necessary for oil to flow and for diplomats to begin the grueling work of drafting a real deal. In a region defined by volatility, the difference between suicidal and merely dangerous is the only progress currently within reach. The ultimate pressure point for the United States remains the domestic economy. With gas prices rising and the campaign of epic fury having no official end date, the political cost of the war is increasing by the hour. The contradiction at the heart of the crisis is that the military tools used to ensure energy stability are currently the primary drivers of market instability. Every bomb that falls hardens the resolve of the IRGC to keep the world's most important waterway closed. Whether the next 72 hours bring a catastrophic escalation or a fragile pause depends entirely on which of these two paths the leaders in Washington, Tehran, and Beijing choose to take.